Happy Friday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. I basically have this whole spiel memorised by now. If you are new here, Balancing the Books is the game where I add up all the books that came onto my TBR with all the books that came off my TBR and try and make those numbers balanced. I am also now combining this with my newest / oldest revamped game, Book Trail. We'll come to that at the end of the video. And this whole video is being made possible by the lovely folks over at Skillshare who are very kindly sponsoring it. So I'll tell you a little bit more about them later. But for now, let's get on with balancing the books. So to get us up to speed, at the beginning of March, I had 37 books on my TBR. And I made a little swap. Maybe this is sneaky, but in my last Balancing the Books, I had to unhaul some books because my numbers weren't balanced. And I chose to unhaul, where is it? This book, Plain Song by Kent Haruf, which I decided to unhaul just because the writing was too small. But so many people commented saying how beautiful this book is and how much I would love this book that I decided having small writing wasn't a good enough reason for me not to read it if it was going to be that good. So I hadn't yet taken the box of books out, and so I decided to keep this one. I rescued it from my donation pile and I instead donated the Christmas Shopaholic book by Sophie Kinsella, because realistically I was not going to like that book. You guys saw me ranting about how much I hated the later books in that series. I was just clinging on to that one because it said the word Christmas in it. I was never going to like it. So that one has gone. Plain Song is back on my TBR. Let's put it safely there. Okay, so with that info all up to scratch, let's see what happened throughout March. The very first thing I did was haul a book. This is The Wangs versus the World by Jade Chang. In fact, as I have learned from reading this book, it's actually The Wongs versus the World. I think that I'm pronouncing that right now. Very early on, one of our main characters in this, Charles Wong, talks about how moving to America was strange for lots of reasons, one of which being in China, where he's from. Actually, he's lived in Taiwan, he's never been to China, but long family background that you can learn if you read this book. The name Wong, which is his surname, means king, and it's like a very respectable surname, and so moving to America where it's pronounced Wang and becomes somewhat of a joke was a bit of a shock to the system. So I haven't yet finished this one. I'm like this much the way through. I was hoping to have finished it before I filmed this so that I could tell you my final thoughts, but that hasn't happened. We have about 3 hours left of March at the time I'm filming this, so it's not going to happen. I'm liking it so far. I got this one for my book club with my offline friends from uni, and I will do a full review in next month's Balancing the Books once I have finished it. The next thing I did after that was read a book. This is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, and this was the first book that I completed for the Tis the Damn Readathon. Basically, this whole month, the whole of March, I was doing Tis the Damn Readathon, which was a Taylor Swift themed readathon that I was co-hosting with a bunch of other people. I vlogged the whole thing, so if you want to see all of my vlogs, I will link them all in the description box. And I read this one for the prompt to read a book that intimidated you. So this is about a butler called Stevens, who has basically spent his whole life, he's now, I don't know, in his 60s, he spent his whole life as a butler and being so proud of that being his life's work, being born to serve. And Ishiguro basically takes us like so deep inside the darkness, the very, very subtle darkness of the kind of English establishment that Stevens is part of and that he's worked for. And as the book goes on, it basically all takes place over a few days. It's just Stevens taking a holiday and driving around, but we go back and back with flashbacks and learn a lot about his life and find more and more dark secrets that were going on at the house that he worked. But it's not a mystery where there are twists and turns and these secrets being revealed drive the plot. It's more a kind of sad, wistful story that takes you inside this man's head as he gets to the stage in life where he's sort of reevaluating everything that he held to be important. I loved it. It's also a lot funnier than I thought it was going to be. The beginning section was very, very funny and like wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And I remember I called my dad when I was quite early on in it, and he has read and loved this book. And I was like, yeah, it's so good. It's not what I thought. It's so funny. And I think he was a bit confused why I was going on about it being funny, because then when I got past the funny section, it suddenly became very, very sad and moving. There is humour the whole way through, but yeah, I wouldn't say that funny is like the most defining characteristic of it once I've read the whole book, but it is surprisingly very funny. Then I reread a book, so this doesn't add any points to this game, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. This is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This one I also read for the Taylor Swift readathon. I actually did 2 vlogs of me reading this book, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here because I've already talked about it in 2 whole vlogs and I will link to both of those below. But spoiler, all you need to know is that I really, really loved this book. I had read it before, but many, many years ago when I was at school, when I was about 11 or 12, and I thought it was so boring. I probably didn't even finish it. Like, I don't really have memories of the book. I just remember us all complaining about reading it. But I knew that everyone loves it, and I knew I was going to like it because I've seen the Hitchcock movie since then, and it's great. So it's not like it surprised me. I knew the twists and turns that were coming, but I was surprised at how good it was, I guess. If you didn't know, this book is about the second Mrs. De Winter, so a young girl or a young woman who marries a much older, very rich man who is recently widowed, and his first wife, Rebecca, was this incredibly glamorous figure who everyone adored. And so the second Mrs. De Winter, whose name we never learn, but I did come up with a theory in my vlogs about what her name is, she feels like she can just never live up, and she becomes completely consumed with obsession about the first Mrs. De Winter. It's spooky, it's gothic, it's got twists and turns, and actually one of the things that I loved the most about it was the main character herself. My memory of her and kind of my assumption of her from just like what I know in pop culture about the book was that she was going to be incredibly timid and passive as a character, and she is. She's timid and she's shy, but she's a fascinating character. I loved her. She daydreams so much. She's got this really rich inner world, and also you kind of get to see a contrast between the self-doubt and paranoia that consumes her versus the way other people see her, which I think is different. I don't think they do see her as this tiny little shy mouse. She's actually an interesting person, but just can't see herself that way. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed being inside this character's head and loved reading this book. Then I did a bit of a book haul, so let's go through these. I have The Dead Girls by Jorge Ibarguengoitia. I have actually hauled this book several times. So one of my colleagues was doing a clear out of their books like 2 years ago, and I took her copy of this because she was just giving everything away, but then I wasn't sure when I was going to read it, so I passed it on and donated it. I have then, it's one of the ones we publish at work, I have ordered it in a couple of times for different book break videos where it fits the theme, and then just like after I order the books in I send them back to the office, so it's gone back to the office a few times. But the most recent time that I ordered it in for a video, I was like, every time I describe this synopsis on camera, it sounds so good, I should just read it. So this time I officially hauled it onto my TBR. It sounds very dark, but it's apparently a dark comedy, but it's based on a true story about these 2 sisters who owned a brothel and were serial killers. They killed like 70 of these women, something like that, something horrific. And this book is fiction, but based on that story, but it's apparently humorous. Like, how is that going to be funny? I want to know. I hauled these 2, Burial Rites and The Good People by Hannah Kent, who I've heard is an author who is great at writing books based on true stories from history. And that's kind of what I'm learning that I enjoy in historical fiction. I used to think that I didn't like historical fiction at all, but I think that's because in general I wasn't like drawn to a book just because it was set in the Tudor period or whatever, whereas I know a lot of people are drawn to that. So that had made me write off historical fiction without actually exploring that historical fiction is like a huge range of genres really. And one thing I know I've liked from reading Emma Donoghue's books, books like The Mercies, is books that take a true fascinating story that happened and turn it into a novel. So that's what both of these are. Burial Rites is the story of the last woman who was ever executed in Iceland, and The Good People is about a woman who was accused of abusing her grandson, but claimed that he wasn't her grandson, he was a changeling. So both of those really caught my attention, again, when I got them in for a book break video, and so I kept them, hauling those. This one was very much on the same theme, The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, one of my most anticipated books, and I can't believe I still haven't got around to reading it. I've had it for like 3 weeks now, which isn't long compared to a lot of the books on here, but considering how much I want to read this. This is based on the true story of 3 men, I think it was 3, who went missing from a lighthouse. So the original real story was in Scotland, but in the book she's moved the action to take place in Cornwall, and it's this mysterious like vanishing without a trace that happened. In this book she sets it in the 70s in Cornwall, and then she also has a parallel timeline set in the 90s, 20 years after these men disappeared, that follows the women who were left behind. I used to be completely obsessed with all stories about like the Bermuda Triangle and the Mary Celeste, and any mysterious vanishing without a trace just really caught my imagination as a kid. So this is everything that I want. It says it's a mystery, a love story, and a ghost story all at once. Wonderful. And then finally from that haul I got Clodo Hill by Neema Shah, which is another historical fiction. Look at me branching out, exploring things. This one is about the expulsion of Ugandan Asians from Uganda in the 70s, which I didn't know anything about at all. So we follow a family who are forced to suddenly leave with very short notice, leave their home and seek refuge in Britain, and don't know what's waiting for them there, if they're going to be welcomed there, if they're going to be safe, and have to completely rebuild their life. But it kind of goes into their family secrets as well. Okay, that feels like a good time to pause and tell you about today's sponsor, which is Skillshare. So you may have heard me talking about Skillshare in a few videos before. I think this is the 4th time that I've worked with them. I think they're fantastic. They're an online learning community, so you can find thousands and thousands of classes on there to help you learn new creative skills, and there's a really big range. And the most recent class that I've taken is one that I loved. So some of them are kind of about specific skills, like taking photos, and this one was more of like a life coaching session. So the class was called Creating Your Dream Career, Uncover and Apply Your Creative Strengths, and it was taught by Holly M. Coley-Murchison. And I was really drawn to it because it's something that feels so relevant to me, and so relevant to, I imagine, lots of you, like so many people these days do build their own career in really different ways than the ways that our parents did it, than the ways even that we were taught at school how to think about it. And the course was this really cool mix of Holly giving her own words of wisdom, telling her own stories of her amazing career and how she's made her perfect path in life, and then also giving you exercises where you had to kind of look at your past, your experiences, your influences, your strengths. You had to envision the kind of future that you wanted. There was an exercise of even making a video. It was a really hands-on and inspiring course. So Skillshare is great that you get such a big range of courses, from very, very practical skills to much more general life-changing skills like this one. So I do have a special code for you. Act fast, because the first 1,000 people to click on the link in the description box below will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership, and after that it's only around $10 a month. So with that, let's get on with balancing my books. Next, I read The Psychopath Test from Jon Ronson, which is one that I'd had on my shelf for a little while. This is a non-fiction book, and I just so rarely read non-fiction. I keep wanting to push myself to read it more often because I love the experience of learning things from reading non-fiction, but I just love fiction so much that I always gravitate towards it instead. But I really enjoyed reading The Psychopath Test. It's called The Psychopath Test, but it's not exclusively about psychopathy. It's sort of about the madness industry. That's a phrase that Jon Ronson uses in this book, which I thought was interesting. The madness industry as a whole, the way in which madness feeds into entertainment. The right kind of madness is key for exploiting people on television, essentially, all the way through to spending a lot of time in prisons and mental institutions and looking at how people are treated who have the wrong kind of madness. And of course, a lot of it is about psychopathy. This umbrella term, does it really exist? Is it something that you can have a test for? There exists a psychopath test, literally a checklist that you can go through and see if somebody has a high score of psychopathy, a lack of empathy. But it's a really interesting journey in this book of Jon Ronson at first getting really excited about this test and then starting to see where it falls through. The kinds of people who technically could tick all of those boxes, but could you view them as a psychopath, or do you view them as just a good, strong leader, for example? You know, there's that statistic about how many CEOs are psychopaths, but what does that mean? Then I read Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. This was another one that I read for Tis the Damn Readathon, and I do have a whole vlog of me reading this book. This is a dystopian story that I actually read this one right after filming my last Trash My TBR, where I asked you guys to trash the books that I actually owned. But in between filming that and posting it, I read this book, which was then so funny because it got completely trashed. It was probably the book that got trashed the most in that video, but by the time I posted it, I was like, I already read it and loved it. I gave it 5 stars. You guys weren't wrong with your comments though. The most common comment of criticism of this was the exact thing that I really, really did not like about this book, which was the author's weird obsession with putting sexual descriptions in places where they just didn't belong, especially when talking about the teenage children of this family. It was very inappropriate, it was very uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy it. I don't enjoy that style of writing that's just a bit too visceral and a bit too, like, deliberate, a bit, you can see the trying in there. I just didn't love it. But when I rate books, I go fully off just like my emotional feeling rather than actually breaking down my critique of it. So even though I really didn't like that aspect of the writing, I still gave this book a 5 stars because of just how much I enjoyed it. It was really, really eerie. It's about a family who are renting a holiday home, and then in the middle of the night one night there is a knock at the door and this couple show up who are the couple who actually own the house. And they reveal that there has been this massive power cut. So it's eerie right from the beginning because you're not quite sure whether to trust this couple. Is what they're saying true because there's no power cut at the house? Are they who they say they are? But slowly the eeriness shifts away from them to the outside world. And I loved the way this story was told. So it's not a book that you will like if you want everything neatly wrapped up. I still don't know what happened in this. We just slowly find out there has been some massive global crisis. It's something to do with climate change. It's something to do with war. We get tiny little snippets of information dropped in there by this omniscient narrator who gives us little hints of what is happening elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the world. Scenes of mass disaster happening other places, but none of that is happening here. The people in this house, so this family plus the couple who own there, they are scared. They are experiencing weird phenomena like sudden massive loud noises and animals behaving very strangely. One of the boys becoming very, very ill. There are creepy things happening, but it's sort of unclear, is this a dystopian end of the world situation? They're not quite sure what is going on, whereas the narrator is letting us know that in the cities, in the urban centres, in the places where there are huge groups of people, they are experiencing mass panic. They are experiencing what we usually see in a dystopian novel or a dystopian action movie, and this family are instead experiencing a very quiet, slow horror. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really, really different. It did send me into a complete state of existential panic, worrying about the end of the world, which is coming and we're in it and it's gonna look like this. But yeah, other than the nightmares, I loved it. Then I read Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. Again, there are vlogs of basically everything that I read this month. This one didn't get a solo vlog though. It was in my final vlog where I just read 3 books in one go. So this is about a 74-year-old man called Barrington who is gay, but closeted to almost everyone in his life. He is married, he has two grown-up children, he has a grandson, and he has been in love for most of his life with a man called Morris. They have been in a secret relationship for about 60 years at this point. And so it's this very moving story, and Barrington is a really, really lovable and hateable main character. Mostly lovable. I did love him, but he was so frustrating. I don't know how to describe him other than to use that very cliche, he's a product of his time, but he is. he is very misogynist. He doesn't understand feminism, but he also doesn't understand gay rights and gay liberation. And he says at one point, there was a quote that really stuck with me where he says that he's been stuck too long in a prison of his own making. It's almost like he has spent so long believing that he has to be closeted, that he can't leave his wife, that he can't be openly in love with Morris, that he now finds the thought of doing those things too scary, and he finds the sight of other people doing those things too strange. So I loved spending time with him. He is cheeky and hilarious, and I loved Morris, getting to know him. I also enjoyed, there are chapters strewn throughout this which are about the wife, Carmel. They are written in a different style, more like the style if you read Girl, Woman, Other. Those chapters were more reminiscent of that, where it's more kind of stream of consciousness. And so those ones were quite sad. They felt like they sort of spoke right to the heart of me a little bit more. And as well as being about these specific characters, it's also about the older Caribbean communities in Britain, in London specifically, and through flashbacks we get to follow them from their life in Antigua to London, and what that journey was like for them and how London has changed for them over the decades. Then I read The Hole by Hiroko Oyamada, which I don't really know what to say about. It was so strange. This was kind of an Alice in Wonderland sort of story. That's why I got it. That's what I thought it was going to be. But realistically, I don't know what it was. Essentially, it was about a young couple who moved to the countryside. So they're Japanese, they live in Japan, they move to the countryside to live right next door to the husband's family. And it's all from the perspective of the wife, who is basically just at home all day, kind of going a little bit mad. And she goes off wandering around and she falls in a hole, but it's not like in Alice in Wonderland where she falls down the hole and like into the rabbit hole. She just falls into a hole and she's like standing there with her head sticking out, and then she gets out of the hole, but she sees these weird creatures and she meets characters that you're not entirely sure are really there. It's definitely a book that I did enjoy while reading it. I mean, it's very short. I read it very quickly. I was enjoying the writing. It's translated from Japanese by David Boyd, so he did a good job. But I got to the end of the book and realised I didn't know what had just happened, and it didn't stick with me at all because I didn't really take any message from it. And someone did leave a comment, so I put this one in one of the vlogs where you can see me reading it, and someone left a comment telling me their take on what the book was about, and I'm actually going to find it because it was interesting to read that comment and be like, wow, I didn't know any of that. And I kind of did have the suspicion when I read it that like I was probably just missing the point and that there was a point, but yeah, I missed it. Okay, so Tokyo Chemist says it's a book that explores a lot of typical Japanese themes, particularly of familial roles and duty, duty to our parents, duty to our husbands, duty to our husband's family, family versus neighbours, large city versus countryside life, loss of tradition, etc. So I think I'm going to have to read it again. And then the final book that I read for Tis the Damn Readathon, I actually hauled and read because it came in a surprise book box, and one of the prompts was to surprise yourself with a book. So this came in a box that I got from Book Retreat. I will link to them below. It's this really cute company that give you a little surprise book boxes that come with a book, plus little snacks, plus little treats on a theme. So I got the relaxation box, so it came with a face mask and a hair mask and a scrunchie, but there are loads of other options on there, so I'll link to their website below. The box was very kindly gifted to me, and I had said I specifically wanted a thriller, and that is what I got in Blood Orange by Harriet Tyce. Unfortunately, I didn't like this book, but I did like the box and everything that came with it. But this is a thriller about a woman who is, on the surface, a bit of a hot mess, but very quickly in the book, I suspected that she wasn't the problem, and then I was never really surprised by anything throughout the rest of the book. She's a lawyer, she's just been given her first murder case, so the book is kind of divided between the murder case, the woman that she is trying to defend, who is accused of murdering her husband, and then our main character, Alison, and the problems in her own marriage, plus the affair that she is having with a rather toxic-seeming man. And yeah, I just didn't enjoy this one. it felt like it was just a bit too grim, and I really like dark, disturbing books, as you may know, but this one, it didn't surprise me, it didn't do anything like new for me. It was just a lot of descriptions of abusive relationships, and I felt very uncomfortable and unhappy a lot of the time while reading it. So this one wasn't for me, but lots of other authors loved it, like Claire McIntosh, who I love, Lisa Jewell, who I've only read one book from, but I loved. They both thought it was great, and so did all these people. We're nearing the end. I hauled How to Save a Life by Eva Carter, another book that I'm halfway through reading. This book begins New Year's Eve. It's about to turn the year 2000. A bunch of sixth form kids are hanging about at a New Year's party, and then one of the boys, Joel, who's like a really popular footballer, his heart stops beating. He drops to the ground, and two of the other teenagers there are called Kerry and Tim. They are both aspiring doctors, and Kerry runs over and gives Joel CPR until the paramedics arrive and save his life, whereas Tim freezes. He has always wanted to be a doctor, but he sees this happen in front of him and he freezes and doesn't know what to do. And we're then going to follow them through the years, all three of those characters, and see how this one event affected them. And I am loving it so far. And also, look how cute this proof is. It opens up, it's got a little heart, and then inside that's what the book's called. It's also making me want to do a first aid course because it has info the whole way through it, which is apparently very accurate, and does say, unfortunately, that it's actually really rare to be able to save somebody's life from doing CPR, but the author herself did exactly that. Her husband's heart stopped beating one night and she performed CPR on him and managed to save his life. So that's what inspired her to write this book. And so there's little like facts throughout it, and it's made me definitely think I should learn how to do that. Another really anticipated book that I hauled, That Night by Gillian McAllister. This one was very kindly sent to me. This one is about your sister calls, she's killed a man. What do you do? Gillian McAllister is an auto-buy author for me. This is her sixth thriller that I've owned, I believe. She is just great. She writes very good characters. That's something that really makes her stand out for me as a writer, is I always so completely believe her characters. And as I read a lot of thrillers, it's really important for me to make a thriller stand out. I have to be really invested in those people and what happens to them, and that is Gillian McAllister's forte. So I'm very excited to read this one that's about sisters and murdering people. And then finally, the very last thing that I did last night was I read a book on Scribd. This one was recommended to me by Fiona, who is one of my patrons. I'm doing the Reading Women challenge this month, as you will know if you've been watching Book Trail, and we'll come to that in a second. And one of the challenges for that is to read a poetry collection written by a black woman, and Fiona recommended that I read All Along You Were Blooming by Morgan Harper Nichols, who is a poet and also has an Instagram. She recommended that I look at the Instagram as well, and I have fallen in love with it. And if you see me sharing like very beautifully illustrated quotes to my stories, they probably come from her. So I did really like this one, but in a bit of a mixed bag way. So poetry is something that is very much outside my comfort zone. I basically never read poetry. I really struggle to get along with most poems that I've tried. I know that poetry is a massive area of writing, and people get very cross if you say you don't like poetry, because they're like, how can you haven't tried every poetry? But in general, I haven't been drawn to poetry, and it doesn't often move me. So I felt very outside my comfort zone. But this book was very interesting because it's sort of a mix of poetry and prose, and it's sort of just a flow of thought. It's just kind of like a self-help waterfall of words, kind of, with beautiful illustrations throughout it as well. And it's divided into 4 sections. So there's the first section is for your heart, the second is for your mind, the third is for your body, and the fourth is for your soul. And I basically like half and half liked this book. I really enjoyed the sections for your heart and for your body. I didn't enjoy the one that was for your mind because it felt like it had quite a lot of religious undertones that I just like wasn't really vibing with, because there were so many quotes in the sections that I loved. There were so many quotes I highlighted and wrote down and will definitely use as like affirmations for myself. Whereas in the Mind section, where it's not explicitly religious, but they just felt like they only made sense if you're religious. It's not that I like had a problem with them, it's just that I wouldn't use those as affirmations for myself because I didn't connect with them. And then again, in the section for your soul, souls aren't really a concept that like mean anything to me. But the two sections I did like, I really, really liked, and definitely will be going back to those really beautiful quotes. So overall, that means that I hauled 9 books onto my TBR in March, and I got 6 books off my TBR by reading them. And as you can see, if you are, like me, a very talented mathematician, 9 and 6 are not equal, and therefore my books are not balanced. So at this point, I have 2 options. Traditionally, what I've had to do if my books aren't balanced is just unhaul the number of books that are needed to balance it out. Recently, I've added a second option for myself, which was recommended by you guys, which is that I am able to take a book, I can't choose the book, it has to be the oldest book on my TBR, and put it in like purgatory. I have to read it within the next month, and if I don't read it, I then have to unhaul it. So let's see, I think I can get rid of some of these myself. For example, Rilla of Ingleside. I don't think I'm going to read this, and I know that for some people it's their favourite. I loved Anne of Green Gables. Book number 1, Anne of Green Gables, was fantastic. And I really didn't like Anne of Avonlea. I loved Anne of the Island, and I don't think I really loved any of them after that. There were some I liked more than others, but there were several in the series that I just skipped flat out because they didn't interest me, and Anne was not the character that I had fallen in love with from Anne of Green Gables, who was just adorable in every way. By this stage in the series, she has fully grown up, and this is about her daughter, and even people who love the book have said that Anne is just completely different. She is not the child Anne that we knew. She is like a grown-up mother figure who has become the lady that she just wasn't when she was 11 or however old she is in the first book. So I think that I'm just not interested in reading this. And someone else will love to find this in a charity shop. Someone who is a huge Anne of Green Gables fan and read all the series but never read this one will be thrilled. So this one can go to charity. It's 1 down. Still 2 to go. Okay, I think I am going to unhaul this book, Big Lies in a Small Town by Diane Chamberlain, because in Trash My TBR, a lot of you said that this just wouldn't be for me. I think it's a very, very popular book, but I'm just maybe not the right audience for it. I prefer thrillers that are more dark, and this I think is just aimed at a more kind of lighter mystery audience. Okay, 2 down, we're doing well. What else to get rid of? I just love you all so much, I don't want you to go. I think I'm going to have to pull the Purgatory card. So the oldest book on my TBR is a Persephone classic. I don't know which one. I just have like a box set of Persephone books, which all of them are the books I've had for the longest. So I'm not going to pick a specific one because they're upstairs in CBA. But the rule is I have to read a Persephone classic by the end of this month, or I have to give one away, or I have to give all of them away. High stakes. I better read that book. I better read that book. So my books are not yet balanced, but I've committed to make them balanced by the next time we meet. And now, before I go, let's play Book Trial! The rules of this game are the following. I have got a whiteboard here, and I am working my way up to my final goal of being able to go on a book shopping spree as a reward. To get points, I have various challenges to complete. Challenge number 1, I will get a point for every Buzzwordathon book that I read. Buzzwordathon is a year-long challenge that Books and Lala set everybody, and I regret to inform you that I don't think I got any points this month. The theme for March was the word time. Did I read anything with the word time in it? I don't believe I did. Last month, the theme was to read a book with any colour in the title, and I didn't do it then, but I've now read Blood Orange. Too late, Blood Orange. 0 points for that. The second challenge is I will get a point for every Reading Women prompt that I tick off. So Reading Women is hosted by the Reading Women podcast, and it's a challenge they set for you to diversify your reading. And this time we're having better luck. I am going to get 2 points for that. So one challenge they set was to read a fantasy book by an Asian author. This is maybe stretching the lines of what fantasy means, but I just don't read like traditional fantasy. It's not something like hardcore high fantasy. It's not something that I'm going to want to read. This was still stretching myself outside my comfort zone. It is fantasy-ish. This description says that it winks at the borderland of reality. This quote calls it fantastical. I think it's fantasy. It's as fantasy as we're gonna get. And so I'm giving myself one of these beautiful coloured little gemstones. Woo woo woo! But it doesn't stop there. I also read Mr. Loverman for the prompt to read a book with a protagonist over 50, and Barrington is 74, and he may be a man and a rather misogynist one at that, but the author is a woman, and the point of this challenge is to read books by women. So we're going back in with our second point of the day. Challenge number 3 is for every number that I manage to get my TBR down by during balancing the books, I get a point. But as you just saw, I didn't even balance them, let alone reduce my TBR, so nothing there. And finally, I get a point for, this one is always hard to explain. So I worked out that 18% of my favourite books of last year were books in translation. So this challenge says that I have to read 18% books in translation. I should be reading 18% books in translation, and if I manage to do that, then I get a point. Well, this is in translation. Is that it? Is that seriously it? That's one book out of 7 books that I read in total, which is 14%. We were kind of close. There is also at the bottom of the board a chance for me to be punished if I don't stick to my resolve of reading at least 25% authors of colour. I don't get any bonus points for doing so, but if I don't manage to in any month, then I have to donate some money. If that happens, I will ask you guys for your suggestions of where I should donate that money, whether it's to a specific publisher or bookshop that is owned by people of colour, or whatever place that you think I should donate that money. We will have that conversation, but let's find out if I did it. So I read 7 books and 4 of them were by authors of colour. So even without doing the maths, I know that 4 out of 7 is more than 25%, and so I don't get a penalty point this time. Well, we made it to the end. So thanks so much for sticking with me, and thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Once again, I will put that link in the description box, and the first 1,000 people to click it will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Leave a wine glass emoji in the comments if you are still with me, and I will see you guys next time. Did it.